All right, that ought to do it. I got it bled. Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by RockAuto.com. Well, if you remember last week, Project M&M Mercury Makeover, it was in the shop because we actually flushed the brake fluid and the power steering fluid. Well, when you flush the brake fluid, it's necessary to bleed it. So we went around to all the wheels and we bled the brakes. Now we're going to turn our attention to actually the rotors and the pads. And why are we doing that? Well, remember, in the evaluation, you had a pedal pulsation. I was stopping and that pedal was pulsating. Brakes just didn't feel very good. It's really very common. And what happens, there's two terms out there. It's disc thickness variation. That's when the pads are hitting it, and that causes a term called lateral runout. That's when the rotor starts to get warped, and it touches those pads, sends the fluid back to the master cylinder. You feel it in the pedal. A couple checks you can make right out in the driveway. You can get a dial indicator. Professionals do this. They clip it to somewhere, go here, secure the rotor, and spin it around. You don't want any more than 3/1000ths lateral runout because that's going to push the pads back and you're going to feel it. Now, another super important measurement you have to make, and that's disc thickness. You have to get rid of the disc if it falls below the minimum thickness specifications. And you just put a micrometer on there, you read it. You can get a nice easy one like I have, a digital one. It just reads it right out for you, and then check the specification. You can see the graphic here. There's always a disc thickness specification. If it falls below that minimum specification, you have to get rid of it. It can't transfer heat. That causes brake fade. Your brakes go to the floor. Super dangerous. So we're just going to go ahead and replace the rotor and the pads. We'll go ahead and show you how to do that. It's really simple. I already broke loose the big bolts on the back on the bracket. Now that could be a bear, so I used a 1/2-inch drive to do it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to come over here. I'm going to use an electric ratchet because I already broke it. And I'm going to pull the two caliper bolts. There's one on the bottom and there's one up on the top here. Now after you get those pulled, sometimes you have to go in there with a screwdriver, pry it back a little bit to give you some play to take the caliper off. We got ours pretty loose here, and then I'm going to flip it up. You got two options at this point. I'm going to go ahead and secure it up here. I got a good place, or I like to use a bungee cord, mechanics wire, some way to support that caliper. Why? Well, this hose, you don't want to damage the hose, and once again, that's the fluid transfer that you need to do the stopping. Once I got that done, you can see the pads in the rotor here. Now I can slide the pads out. Under our case, I can just switch over here and I can go ahead and pull the whole bracket off. And once I get the whole bracket pulled off on the back, that'll give us access to the actual rotor assembly. There's two bolts located in the back here. And like I said, I broke them loose earlier. They're big bolts, and you also need some Loctite when you reassemble it because these bolts have to stay secure. It's the only thing holding your caliper assembly on. So once I get those pulled out, now it's just as simple as moving the whole bracket off. Once I get the whole bracket off, the actual pads are going to go with it. So you can see I got the brackets right here, the pads. Now the pads aren't even worn out, but you know what? Man, we got pads and rotors. We got Tom back with us from RockAuto.com. Tom, this rotor's pretty rusty. I mean, there's a lot of meat on it, 53,000 miles, but that pedal pulsation, it's not worth cutting. You got all kinds of options for us.
Now, this is a nice southern car, but in lots of parts of the world where the road salt's creating rust, you'll get a buildup of rust here that'll create jacking, that'll actually push that rotor out and contribute to that pulsing sensation. At RockAuto.com, we have new hardware, the bleeder valves, pins that can get that corrosion and contribute to the pulsing or squealing if everything isn't lined up right. A lot of times in the rustier parts of the world, these will just snap off when you go to open them up.
I was surprised ours didn't now. We bled ours, and I mean, it's been sitting for a while, but like you said, it's from the south. A lot of times that happens to us. They snap off. It's no good. I can't bleed the brake system. So yeah, good idea. So that's separate as well. Really like that Rock Auto carries the separate parts because maybe just perhaps I want to go in and I want to sand the brake pads or clean up the brake system. Just do a service, maybe not a whole replacement. And you know, the pins start sticking. Those are floating calipers. That has to move. If that doesn't move, you're going to get inboard premature pad wear, or the pads are going to wear too early. So I can get this all separate.
Absolutely, and it's a good idea when you replace the rotors to always put on new pads. You don't want that squealing. The tolerances stack up, and you're more likely to get squealing if you don't put new pins, new pads when you put your new rotors on.
Now our car, you know, it's pulsating, but it's also been sitting for 2 years. So we're going to go ahead and do the front rear. It was pretty inexpensive. What was our choices? This is what's really cool. I mean, I got multiple choices on pads and rotors.
Yeah, especially when a car gets to be 10 years old, you have a choice of brands, you have a wide choice of prices, so you don't have to worry about wearing your pads down to the last millimeter. They're just not that expensive.
and we're going to use the actual Element 3, which is, you know, middle of the road. I mean, we got pads, inexpensive pads. If we want to put them on here, we can do this job for virtually nothing. I mean, and we're talking about brakes, a safety issue.
Right. Yeah, you talk about inspecting the brakes, just go ahead and replace the pads. The cost is so low, you got your wheel off.
Exactly.
Might as well replace it.
Well, I'll tell you what, hand me that rotor. That's a beauty. I got this wiped down so we don't create any lateral run out. Now, what you would do at this point, Tom, it's pretty simple. We'll just reverse the procedure. We'll put everything back together, you know, and then use your torque specifications. That's huge. Also, pump your pedal before you drive the car. We push the calipers back. We'll jump to the rears. We'll get the rears done. I'll meet you over at the table. I think it's really cool that we can show our viewers there's so much going on with pads and brakes. We'll look at it at rockauto.com.
That'll be fun.
Now, Tom, on the Project M&M, I was astounded by so many choices when it came to brakes and the pads. Nothing to it. I mean, walk us through that.
Yeah, as the cars get older, we get more and more brake choices. We get these wholesaler closeouts that are quality parts, but they're in limited quantities. We pay a lot less for them, so we pass that savings on to customers. So I pulled up an example, the 1997 Nissan Altima. Just look at all these brake choices you have, starting at less than $5.
$5 for a set of brake pads.
Famous brands for less than $10.
Wow.
So when you're thinking about inspecting or getting down to the last millimeter, don't even bother, just replace them.
Absolutely. I mean, we would just sand them down sometimes and insulate the back. We got some brake squeal. For $5 or $10, I'm going to throw them on the car.
Yep, that makes more sense.
Will you get on rockauto.com, get you some brake pads for less than $10, and take a short break, because we'll be right back with more Tech Garage right after this.